The humid Chicago air hung heavy outside our penthouse window, mirroring the tension that had been building inside for months. From this 42nd floor vantage point, Lake Michigan stretched out like a sheet of hammered steel, indifferent to the storm brewing in our meticulously curated life. Arthur had always loved this view, the way the city lights glittered at night like fallen stars. Now all I saw were escape routes. Our life had been a carefully constructed edifice, built brick by painstaking brick, fueled by ambition and, at least on my part, a desperate longing for security. Arthur, with his inherited wealth and effortless charm, had swept me off my feet during a conference in San Francisco. I was a junior analyst then, bright-eyed and working myself to the bone. He was a titan of industry, or so it seemed, with a portfolio that spanned everything from tech startups to real estate. He'd painted a picture of a life beyond my wildest dreams. Elegant dinners, weekends in Aspen, a future where I wouldn't have to chase deadlines and live on lukewarm coffee. And for a while it was exactly that. We moved into this glass and steel tower overlooking the lake, filled it with designer furniture that I was always slightly afraid to touch, and hosted lavish parties where the champagne flowed as freely as the empty promises Arthur whispered in my ear after our guests had left. The first crack in the facade appeared subtly, like a hairline fracture in expensive porcelain. A business deal gone sour, he'd said, a temporary setback. But then there were others, each one chipping away at the carefully constructed image of invincibility. The late-night phone calls, the hushed conversations in his study, the increasing irritability that he couldn't quite mask. They all painted a different picture. I started paying closer attention, poring over the financial reports that used to bore me, asking pointed questions that he'd deflect with a dismissive wave of his hand. It was like trying to piece together a puzzle in the dark, the shapes indistinct and the picture constantly shifting. The final blow came during a tense breakfast overlooking the misty lake. We were arguing again about money, about his increasingly erratic decisions. He slammed his fist on the marble tabletop, making the silverware jump. His face, usually so composed, was contorted with rage. "Fine, Eleanor," he'd spat, his voice low and venomous. "Leave. Take whatever trinkets you've accumulated. But leave with nothing. Not a dime of what I built." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. For a moment, I felt a familiar wave of fear wash over me, the ingrained insecurity of the girl who had grown up with very little. But then something shifted. A spark of defiance, long dormant, flickered to life. "Is that a threat, Arthur?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He just glared, his silence a more potent weapon than any shouted insult. I finished my coffee, the bitterness a familiar taste now. As he retreated to his study, presumably to make more of those mysterious phone calls, I walked into my own small office. The trading platform on my computer screen glowed with numbers, a language I had once understood so well. Arthur had added my name to some of his investment accounts years ago, a gesture that had seemed like a symbol of trust at the time. I hadn't paid much attention to it, blinded by the illusion of our shared future. But now it was different. Now it was a lifeline. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating the familiar interface. I found the portfolio, the list of his holdings, the shares he so fiercely guarded. A grim satisfaction settled over me as I clicked sell, then confirm. The orders went through instantly, the digital confirmation a silent promise. He hadn't even started packing his bags, hadn't even begun to fathom that the nothing he'd so confidently declared was already slipping through his fingers. The screen showed the transaction complete, a stark, undeniable record of my rebellion. My breath hitched. It was done. The vast sum, a figure that would change everything, was now sitting in an account linked to my name. A strange calm settled over me, a quiet hum beneath the adrenaline. This wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. This was about survival, about not being left with nothing. I walked back to the living room, the city still sprawling endlessly outside. The silence of the apartment felt heavier now, charged with the unsaid, with the irreversible. I pictured Arthur in his study, oblivious, probably making calls to some hapless associate, still believing he held all the cards. The irony was almost palatable. My mind raced, charting the next moves. There was no going back from this. The shares were gone, the funds transferred. I needed to disappear, and quickly. Chicago, for all its beauty, suddenly felt too small, too exposed. I pulled out my old beaten-up laptop. The one I used for personal things. Far from the polished company-issued devices. I bought a one-way ticket. Not to a glamorous hideaway. Not to some island paradise. To a small town in Oregon. A place I'd only ever seen in pictures. A place that felt as far removed from Arthur's world as possible. A quiet, unassuming place with mountains and rain, and a life that felt entirely disconnected from the one I was leaving behind. It was impulsive, yes, but also a desperate craving for anonymity. The airline confirmation pinged. 3 hours until departure. My gaze swept around the opulent living room, taking in the expensive art, the custom-made furniture, the glittering chandelier that Arthur had insisted on. These weren't my memories. They were his acquisitions. I moved to my dressing room, pulling a small, battered duffel bag from the back of my closet. It was the same bag I'd used when I first moved to Chicago, a lifetime ago. I didn't pack clothes. Not really. Just essentials. My passport, a few changes of comfortable, nondescript outfits. My old journal filled with half-formed dreams from a life before Arthur. I slipped my phone, wiped clean of any shared photos or contacts, into my pocket. No digital footprints. I made sure of it. As I zipped the bag, I heard the faint sound of Arthur's voice from his study. Louder now, agitated. He must have checked something, seen something. A tremor ran through me, a primal instinct to flee. This was it. I glanced at the grand piano in the corner, a relic of Arthur's brief foray into classical music. On top of it, a framed photo. Arthur and me smiling, arms linked at some charity gala. We looked happy, two perfectly curated individuals. I picked it up, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. Then, with a quiet, decisive click, I flipped it face down. I walked out of the apartment, the weight of the duffel bag oddly comforting. I didn't look back. The elevator doors hummed shut, sealing off that chapter of my life. As I descended, the city lights rose to meet me, no longer a glittering promise, but a maze I was determined to escape. The silence in the elevator was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I could almost hear Arthur's roar, echoing through the empty halls of the penthouse. He would know soon enough, and I would be long gone. The taxi ride to O'Hare was a blur of flashing city lights and hushed anxiety. Every siren, every sudden brake light made me flinch. I kept my gaze fixed out the window, watching the familiar architecture of Chicago recede, each skyscraper a monument to a life I was actively dismantling. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. Just a cold, hard sense of purpose. At the airport, the chaos was a welcome distraction. The roar of departing jets, the endless stream of hurried travelers, the disembodied announcements. It all served to dilute the thumping in my chest. I checked my small duffel bag, purchased a ridiculously overpriced bottle of water, and found my gate. The boarding announcement was music to my ears. As the plane lifted off, banking sharply over the illuminated grid of the city, I finally allowed myself a single shaky breath. Below, Chicago sparkled, a diamond necklace strewn across the darkness. Somewhere in that glittering expanse, Arthur was waking up to a very different reality. Back in the penthouse, the silence was shattered. Arthur's enraged roar echoed through the empty apartment, bouncing off the polished marble and glass. He had just opened his trading app, perhaps to check on his portfolio, perhaps to gloat over his supposed dominance. The numbers on the screen, usually a source of immense satisfaction, now delivered a gut punch. The massive block of shares, the cornerstone of his most lucrative holdings, was gone. Sold. His mind reeled, trying to process the impossible. He furiously scrolled through the transaction history, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the timestamp, just hours ago. And then the name. Eleanor. The phone slipped from his trembling hand, clattering against the glass coffee table. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling he hadn't experienced since childhood. He stalked to my office, the door now slightly ajar, revealing an empty, pristine space. No note, no explanation, just an absence that screamed defiance. He threw open the closet doors in my dressing room. My personal laptop was gone. My old duffel bag. His rage, potent and all-consuming, turned to a chilling realization. This wasn't a tantrum. This was premeditated. This was war. He stormed back to his study, snatching up his phone. His mind already calculating, plotting his next move. Meanwhile, thousands of feet above the earth, I stared out at the blanket of clouds. The plane hummed, a gentle lullaby carrying me westward. I wasn't sure what awaited me in Oregon. A new beginning. A temporary reprieve. All I knew was that the ground beneath me was shifting, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one controlling the tremor. The thought of Arthur's face when he discovered the truth brought a faint, grim smile to my lips. He had said leave with nothing. I had ensured he would be the one feeling the sting of that word. Arthur's fury was a living, breathing entity, coiling in his gut and clawing at his throat. He paced the penthouse like a caged predator, the city lights below a mocking panorama. Every corner of the apartment, every expensive piece of furniture, seemed to whisper Eleanor's name, each whisper a fresh jab. He slammed his fist onto his mahogany desk, the impact rattling the framed photos that now felt like a grotesque joke. He grabbed his phone, his fingers flying across the keypad. His first call was to his legal team, their answering service picking up. "Get a hold of Robert Maxwell," he barked into the receiver, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Tell him it's an emergency. I need him here first thing in the morning." Next, he called his broker, the poor man roused from sleep by Arthur's barely contained explosion. "How could this happen, Michael? How could she sell my shares? My primary holdings?" Michael, clearly flustered, stammered. "Mr. Thorne, her name was on the account. You authorized it. She had full trading authority, joint access. It's perfectly legal on paper. We just assumed." "You assumed," Arthur roared, cutting him off. "You assumed my wife would commit grand larceny." "It's not larceny, Mr. Thorne," Michael said, his voice regaining a touch of professional composure, even through the phone line. "It's a sale, authorized by an account holder. The funds would have been transferred to the linked personal account." Arthur hung up, his jaw clenched so tight he felt his teeth might crack. The linked personal account. The one he'd opened for us, for her, as a gesture of his supposed generosity. The account she now controlled. He slumped into his leather chair, the weight of his betrayal heavy on him. He had been so sure she was just a pretty face, easily manipulated, easily dismissed. He had underestimated her, and it was going to cost him dearly. His mind, sharp and ruthless in business, began to churn through strategies for retaliation. He couldn't just call the police. It wasn't a crime legally. This was a civil matter, a very public, very humiliating one. He needed to freeze the assets. He needed to find her. He needed to make her pay. He started compiling a list of private investigators, his fingers flying across his tablet. He had contacts, powerful ones, in every sector. He would unleash them all. He would make her life a living hell. He would ensure she couldn't spend a single cent of his money. He would hunt her down no matter where she ran. The city lights outside seemed to mock him, but a cold, predatory glint entered his eyes. He would turn those lights into a beacon leading him directly to her. The hunter's fury. The first rays of dawn barely touched the Chicago skyline as Robert Maxwell, Arthur's seasoned legal counsel, entered the penthouse. His face, usually a mask of calm professionalism, showed a flicker of concern as he took in Arthur's disheveled appearance and bloodshot eyes. Papers were strewn across the desk, and a half-eaten, cold breakfast sat forgotten. "She sold them, Robert," Arthur rasped, his voice raw. All of them. Every single share in Meridian Global. Transferred the funds to the joint account. Robert's eyebrows shot up. Meridian Global was the jewel in Arthur's crown, the vast majority of his liquid assets tied up in it. And you had given her full trading authority, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Arthur, in his hubris, often cut corners, trusting those he thought he controlled. Arthur slammed his fist on the desk again. As my wife. A gesture of trust. Not so she could gut my holdings and vanish into thin air. Unfortunately, Arthur, Robert began, choosing his words carefully. If she had legitimate access and the transactions were recorded correctly, it's not outright theft. It's a rather audacious dissolution of assets. We can freeze the funds, perhaps argue undue influence, but it will be a messy, drawn-out legal battle. And she clearly planned this. The money's likely already been moved. Arthur just stared at him, his gaze chillingly empty. Then we find her. And we make sure she can't touch a dime of that money. Not a single cent. Over the next few days, the penthouse became a command center of retaliation. Robert Maxwell initiated legal proceedings, filing injunctions to freeze the transferred funds, though they both knew it was likely a long shot given the speed of Eleanor's actions. Arthur, meanwhile, unleashed his personal network. He hired a team of high-priced private investigators, their reach extending across the country. They scoured flight manifests, credit card transactions, and any digital footprint Eleanor might have left. He called in favors from old associates, people with connections to data brokers and surveillance experts. He wanted to know everything: where she went, who she talked to, how she planned to use his money. His days were a blur of phone calls, strategy meetings, and simmering rage. Sleep offered no respite, haunted by images of Eleanor's quiet, defiant exit. He replayed their last argument, dissecting every word, every look. He had seen her as docile, as a beautiful accessory, and in doing so, he had completely missed the steel that lay beneath. He learned that the funds had been moved through a series of untraceable digital transfers, a ghost in the financial system. His vast network of contacts, usually so effective, hit dead ends. Her credit cards hadn't been used since the morning she left. Her phone was a dead signal. It was as if she had simply evaporated. But Arthur wasn't one to give up. He believed everyone had a weakness, a trail they couldn't help but leave. He increased the reward for information, making it clear to his investigators that failure was not an option. He would make an example of Eleanor. He would show the world what happened when someone dared to defy Arthur Thorne. Eleanor landed in Portland, Oregon, under a sky the color of bruised plums. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark contrast to the humid, exhaust-laden breath of Chicago. From there, a small rented car took her east, deeper into the Willamette Valley, towards the unassuming town of Ashland. She hadn't chosen it for any grand reason, just a quiet place she'd seen once in a travel magazine, surrounded by mountains and far from anything Arthur could easily trace. Her first few days were a blur of practicalities. She opened new bank accounts under a slightly altered name, moved the vast sum of money into secure, diversified investments, ensuring its untraceability. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was using Arthur's own money, the very wealth he'd tried to deny her, to build a fortress against him. She found a small, charming bungalow on the outskirts of town, nestled among towering trees. It was modest, nothing like the glass palace she'd left, but it felt like hers in a way nothing ever had before. She spent her days exploring the quiet town, hiking the nearby trails, and simply breathing. There were no endless social engagements, no forced smiles, no frantic chase for more. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding a quiet companionship in the soft purrs of rescued cats and the wagging tails of eager dogs. The constant adrenaline that had fueled her in Chicago slowly dissipated, replaced by a steady, quiet hum of peace. News of Arthur's frantic attempts to find her trickled down through obscure financial forums and hushed whispers among her old contacts. whispers that she actively sought out, maintaining a careful distance. He was obsessed, she heard. His reputation had taken a hit, not just from the financial loss, but from the public humiliation of being outmaneuvered by his own wife. His once unshakable confidence had cracked, replaced by a brittle fury. He'd thrown immense resources at tracking her, but her digital vanishing act had been meticulous. The money, now spread across various anonymous digital channels, was a ghost in the machine he couldn't grasp. Months turned into a year. Eleanor started a small online business consulting for local startups, using her sharp analytical mind in a way that felt productive and fulfilling, free from the cutthroat world she'd left. She invested in the community, finding genuine connections, true friendships. She learned to garden, her hands calloused but content. The memories of Arthur, once a searing wound, faded into a distant, almost abstract unpleasantness, like a bad dream. One rainy afternoon, sipping tea on her porch, she saw a news article pop up on her tablet. A small piece buried on a financial page. Arthur Thorne's conglomerate, once a titan, was facing significant restructuring, heavily leveraged, struggling after a series of unforeseen financial setbacks. The article didn't mention her, of course, but the subtext was clear. He was bleeding. He hadn't been left with nothing, not truly, but he was certainly no longer invincible. Eleanor closed the tablet, a gentle smile touching her lips. The rain outside intensified, washing the world clean. She felt no malice, no triumph, just a quiet sense of justice. He had told her to leave with nothing, but she hadn't. She had taken her future, her freedom, and a very precise portion of his hubris. And in this quiet corner of Oregon, surrounded by mountains and the gentle rhythm of a life truly lived, she finally had everything.